Good to see you, Dan. First things first, anything I say is my own opinion, not that of any employer, past or present. I want to actually make it very clear for your audience that yes, we did come from Newton, Massachusetts, but our history goes a lot long, it goes pretty long in that. We played against each other in baseball in high school. And I'll just say this to all of you. He was one, Dad was one of the best athletes in our conference, and the people and my classmates feared going up against him in all the sports he played. He was just that good. And
This is not supposed to include paid advertisements, but I
I
appreciate
know,
it.
no. But I'm saying it's saying that we go a very long
Yeah,
way.
yes. No, thank you. I think I actually remember pitching against you in Little League, weirdly enough. Um,
That's true as well. I just remember, yeah, it's been that long. Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
we're talking like 20 years. Um, so we've connected in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last few months, and then in the last week when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I know we both knew him from when you and I were in college, and Charlie was running around as a college dropout. What was your interaction like with Charlie back when you were in college?
So I only interacted with him once in person, and that was back in 2015 at the David Horowitz Freedom Center's West Coast retreat. It was that weekend, if I recall. It was the infamous panel in which you and Charlie and Chloe Valdery were talking about the quote unquote war on campus, which became uh, a hot topic of conversation with some of our old friends and detractors. But it was that weekend that I ended up meeting him and
Well, it's actually
we.
ironic because there's Max Blumenthal who started trying to write about it, and then
Mhm.
now he's writing it after Charlie was assassinated.
Yeah, it's funny how everything becomes a circle. But no, when I met Charlie, like as you're saying, yeah, it was 3 years into his Turning Point USA stuff. He had been making waves slowly but surely. It was more of I wouldn't say it was a trickle at that point. I think it was starting to flow a little bit more so, and it was the era of socialism sucks, and all those shirts that were passing around through campuses. And I think after that weekend, we linked up and ended up having a lot of conversations like over period of 3 years from about the time I graduated college to when I was in the midst of law school and working for the Daily Wire. And no, he was always a very kind, caring individual who really cared about what other people were saying and trying to make sure the conversations were going forth in the right way. I saw his evolution from from the pre-Trump years to the early Trump president, the first at least the beginning of the first term of Trump, and just watching him go into the stratosphere. Someone that I wish over the last several years I had kept much better touch with was nothing short of extraordinary. We knew, I think, like everyone else, we all knew he was special.
It's crazy that that same kid is being memorialized by essentially the entire country, and that President Trump announced that he had been assassinated. I don't think that the average person can comprehend what that's like for contemporaries of Charlie's,
Hmm.
seeing that trajectory, because Charlie was an amazing kid and had amazing
Hmm.
talents, but just to go from 10 years of being a little kid running around college campuses, flying economy from Chicago to Atlanta to Virginia to New York, and then doing everything all over again, to all of a sudden being on Air Force One, being assassinated, having the president announce that he had been murdered, and then having Air Force Two fly his body. It's really hard to actually put that into words.
Yeah. I think the most that I've been telling family and friends is that just imagine that you see, but that you see someone growing up. I think is the best way that we could describe it is even if Charlie and I, even though I've been off the grid and not following a lot of stuff for a long time, I was still watching him and still seeing how things were going. It's like you're watching this young, energetic kid who's very close in age to both of us, who had big dreams and big aspirations and hopes and ideas that he wanted to share and wanted to make more mainstream. And he turned into this very consequential young man who was more matured, who became more serious, who became finer in his craft and being able to argue and to persuade and to drive a conversation where in places where those types of conversations were extraordinarily difficult for people like us back in our college days. And he did it so well.
And I'm not trying to be trolly here, but we're both Jewish. Did you think
Mm,
that Charlie had an anti-Semitic bone in his body?
not in the slightest. The last real conversation I had with him, we were having, there was an event that he had where a Reconstructionist rabbi started spouting out some really weird takes to the point where where she was claiming that teaching the Torah was, dare I say, brainwashing. And for someone like Charlie, who he told me, and this is one of the last things he ever told me, he's like, I revere the Jewish tradition. It did not make sense that he saw people who said that they were Jewish and wore like yarmulkes and looked the part and really and spoke Yiddish or talked about or anything along those lines and saying things that were so apparently denigrating to our history, to our traditions, to the Bible, to Israel. Like it just did not make sense to him. And he
I,
kept asking those questions to all like just like early, mostly to you and definitely a little bit to me, but we've seen clips of this for days about how he kept asking all these questions.
I'll say this. I remember talking to him and he couldn't understand how Hillel and Stand With Us and J Street, not putting all of those in the same category, but in some iteration, those three groups and others were trying to isolate him in fighting campus BDS and anti-Semitism. J Street, of course, would not touch anything that has to do with conservatism. Students for Justice in Palestine are just overtly anti-Semitic, of course. The Hillel houses needed to keep a huge coalition, so they would be very hesitant to work with someone like Charlie because they don't want to offend the LGBTQ club or the Muslim Student Association or any other club that represents minorities on campus.
Mhm.
And Stand With Us kind of adopted some of that language as well. So some of these people were actually against conservatives being involved in fighting BDS. And now you see where that left us now. You see college campuses today. And I don't necessarily think that there's been a reckoning about how those strategies actually worked or did not work. But it's very fascinating for me looking back through my messages with Charlie and seeing who was actually standing up against him. And, like you, I hadn't really been paying so close attention in the last 4 to 6 years. I got married, have kids, have a business. But when I look and I see that the ADL had a dossier on Charlie, I'm like, what is wrong with these people? And it's maddening.
Well, the ADL's been a problem for decades, and full disclosure, I work for an organization called Americans for Peace and Tolerance with Charles Jacobs, and one of the things that what we would talk about and like sound the alarm on was how the ADL managed to become more politically involved with the radical left, and managed to adopt a lot of their language that would undercut all the ideas of unity between moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats and started to really go after anyone who pushed back against this intersectional coalition that the ADL was trying to create as being bigot, sexist, racist, homophobe, etc. And in doing so, the ADL managed to abdicate the responsibility of which it was founded upon back in 1913 to stop the rising tides of anti-Semitism, and they focus so much more attention on the quote unquote far right and anyone who identified as being more conservative, and then they turn a blind eye to radical left anti-Semitism, progressive anti-Semitism, which unfortunately has become more popularized, and that's what Charlie was fighting against nearly the last 2 years after October 7th. So there might like and the ADL not has been well behind the eight ball with all
Oh,
the.
I mean, I think they're actually actively pouring fuel on the fire in many ways, and I think that this stance really led to some of the problems that we see on campus and beyond,
Mhm,
because instead of confronting the root cause, which was people trying to undermine the West, they tried to make it a uniquely Jewish issue. And because they made it a uniquely Jewish issue, they were not actually confronting the brain rot that was going on college campus. So if you were to take, for example, the transgender issue, so because Charlie in Turning Point USA was not in favor of transgender ideology, they are seen as bigoted and therefore not able to work in a coalition to fight against Jew hatred.
mhm,
But most of the people who believe in this kind of ideology actually hate Israel
mhm,
because they see it as a white colonialist, ethno nationalist state that fits into all sorts of conservative things that they already despise. So instead of hitting that on as one big thing, certainly back a decade ago, they would say, a lot of these groups would say, oh, well, we can't be radical with these conservatives. That's why even the quote unquote standard conservatives, they were targeting the Charles Jacobs. They were targeting Ben Shapiro. They were targeting David Horowitz. They were saying these people are extreme. And it turns out that these people were right all along.
right. And I think, unfortunately, that instead of focusing on the rot, as you were pointing out, that has been emanating on college campuses for decades, and it goes as far back as Columbia Unbecoming, the
Right,
David Project documentary from
2003, 2004.
2004,
Yeah.
that we've known that those who have been paying attention have known that this has been an issue. And this is and either people decided wanted to turn the blind eye because they didn't want to anger the people that they were trying to befriend, or they just had a very malicious intent to try to demonize and defame those who wanted to push back against the moral rot as being part of this network of silencing individuals based on identity
And
politics.
you know it's funny, and again, it's very strange, but the way in which these hard left organizations like the ADL and others have approached this is really such a warped thing. If you actually look at some of these anti-Semitic lunatics, which I'm not saying everyone should, but I've kind of gone down that rabbit hole trying to understand how we got here. And you look at someone like a Jake Shields, right? Jake
Mhm.
Shields is actually mad that leftist Jews have undermined the fabric of America. And it's not, you can't just dismiss him as some insane right-wing lunatic. There's that when you do that, you're actually not addressing some of the argument that actually needs to be addressed. I'm not saying it has to be addressed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu like he did with today, but I think that there, it's not. These arguments are far more complex, and when you try to just dismiss it as some right wing horrible criticism, you are actually making the issue worse. So that's how groups like the ADL and others got mad at Charlie for making some of that same criticism that someone like a Jake Shields would make. But Charlie did it not out of hatred. He did
Hmm.
it out of love and out of just a statement of fact. Like if you were to
Hmm.
ask the Ethical Culture Center on Manhattan's Upper West Side if they support progressive policies that fundamentally change America,
Hmm.
they would say they proudly support those things. They are not hiding it. So Charlie points that out, that these individuals and Jewish donors are doing that, and they say, oh my God, what an anti-Semite. No, there's actually a sophisticated point here, which is saying that trying to promote a highly racialized version of America in the sense that you're defining every single person through a DEI lens, that undermines some of the main principles of America. And that's not anti-Semitic to say that.
I
And
don't
yeah,
disagree. And the reason I don't disagree is because we have these conversations amongst our own community. We're but like, sorry, we're not just both Jewish or both Orthodox. You're when like
right.
we're in different sides of different
No, no,
sides of the
we all we
scale.
all we all care about the Jewish Sabbath.
Right. So the point that I'm making is that even amongst ourselves, we're taking a look or taking stock on the conversations that we're having about religiosity, about Jewish identity, about how do we talk about Zionism, how do we talk about our place in the American fabric, how do we the question of reconciliation is people trying to create this false binary that you can't be a proud American patriot and also be a Zionist who wants to see Israel succeed as a sovereign Jewish state. Like we keep having these conversations amongst ourselves, and and there's a lot more that we have in common in certain areas than there's division. But where the division exists is substantial, and a lot of it, in my view, has to do with just the way in which American Jews overwhelmingly have divorced themselves from the traditions and the ideals of Judaism that tie into to the Judeo aspect of Judeo-Christian society, and they take it for granted.
Correct. And actually, not to go back to Jake Shields, but he's actually mad that American Jews are not like Israeli Jews, because he says Israeli Jews, they can be nationalistic, but American Jews, you're not allowed to be nationalistic, which is not a no, but okay. I'm Do you understand
I, yeah, I
the
see I
the
see where you're coming
kernel?
from.
There's a kernel of truth in what he's saying, and that Israeli Jews are saying we want Israel to be a Jewish state. By and large, not talking about the fringe left in Israel, but by and large, the normal person, you want Israel to be a Jewish state. You're proud that Israel has a Jewish identity, and it is different than America. It is a Jewish state.
100%.
Okay, then you have American Jews on the left who are saying open borders, DEI, everything there, and because these people are kind of simpletons, they are Jake Shields. I'm talking about. He took a few too many hits to the head in MMA, and he's talking about, and he's taught, but his point is not. You can't just dismiss it and say, okay, that's like a lunatic, even though he is a lunatic and he says some many anti-Semitic things. But the problem is that the Jewish institutions don't know how to answer that in a sophisticated way, and not and they don't know how to make it in a compelling way either, which is how you end up with them like the Nick Fuenteses and the Candace Owens and
Hmm.
even Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson saying, oh, well, the conversation is shut down because they just try to shut everything up instead of having a sophisticated approach to it. But the way that the Jewish establishment in America is by and large set up is to essentially stifle some of these discussions because they can never acknowledge that they have some of these fundamental issues with the Bible, right? So if you're a hard left Jewish progressive in America, you statistically believe in something called biblical criticism, which is the suggestion that the Bible was written by man. God forbid, you and I both reject that notion. But if you believe that, then the 10 Commandments become the 10 suggestions. It
Hmm.
becomes divinely inspired. I went to one of these brainwashing schools where they try to teach you that stuff, or at least that's an option. So it's 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 the reality. And instead of actually dealing with it, the Jewish community is trying to have this big, large tent, and you end up having these discussions, and that's how you end up punting on things like intermarriage, on things like Shabbat, on things like keeping kosher,
Mhm.
because everything is optional. And it sets up a conversation where you end up with the American Jewish Committee donating $25,000 to a church in Gaza, citing Timothy Dolan as like the rabbi, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and then saying it's a Jewish value. So like this is crazy.
You're not wrong. And here's the fundamental issue. We are afraid to have these conversations, and by we I mean are the general mainstream of the American Jewish society, because we are so reflexive of any time that there's any bit of criticism against us that we have to hide back into our shtetls, and that we just have to have this group think, and we have to all be on the same page. You have to play along to get along, and if it means playing along with the party that we were much closer to for generations, to ensure that we have some sort of protection there, and that we don't have to worry about everything else on the outside. It's all well and good. This is shtetl mentality. And when you stay in the shtetl, you're not able to go, you don't walk out, you don't interact with people, and you don't ask the fundamental questions. Why is it that people have these nasty views? We're not saying that we should legitimize them. I obviously those who are deeply anti-Semitic should not be taken seriously, but we have to ask ourselves the fundamental question. If someone is going to say, make a particular comment about left-leaning American Jews engaging in quasi self-destructive, not outright self-destructive behavior, we have to ask the question, why are we doing this to ourselves? And more importantly, not only are we doing this to ourselves at the expense of everyone else, why are we doing this at the expense of ourselves and our safety, when the people that we are trying that we are at that with these ideas that we're advocating for are coming around and stabbing us in the back?
Absolutely. And again, I was just pulling up this tweet from Megyn Kelly. It was about Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk from the AJC. And it says Charlie Kirk and Megyn Kelly floated the baseless conspiracy theory that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent and admitted they had no evidence. That doesn't matter, because what people will remember is the lie. This isn't just irresponsible. It's a textbook example of how right-wing anti-Semitism spreads through conspiracies dressed up as innocent speculation. They gave oxygen to an age-old trope of Jewish control, and in today's climate, that's not just offensive, it's dangerous. Look, you're telling me that Charlie and Megyn Kelly sat in a room with thousands of young conservatives who are obsessed over this Epstein suicide because it's a crazy thing, and they had some shock jock conversation about it that you and I might not like, but to say that that's anti-Semitic is really wild. And why are we scoring own goals on something like this? It's really crazy, but that makes sense why Charlie and Megyn would then be upset, because they could say, listen, we're getting attacked by the American Jewish Committee. This sounds so official, but it's really a textbook example of really bad Jewish leadership. Uh,
And these same people who are gonna hammer Megyn Kelly and Charlie for that, they're not going to be as loud. They were definitely not as loud as they were against Claudine Gay, where calling for genocide against Jews depends is okay depending on the context, or talking about why, or they're not going as hard in the paint when it comes to Mamdani and this whole globalize the Intifada nonsense. Like there are like it's selective outrage at its worst, and it makes you wonder what do they have to prove, and whom do they need to prove it to justify their continued misrepresentations of what's going on in the American Jewish community, when we are facing exceptionally high rates of hate crimes going up against us, and a lot of that is happening in places like New York City. I promise you that it isn't a bunch of neo-Nazis. I promise you that it's not that. And no one wants to have that, and no one wants to have that conversation because it forces people to ask the tough questions, and it makes people want to look themselves in the mirror and think, why have I been voting Democrat this entire time? I was a Democrat when I was a lot younger. I voted for Obama in 2012. I
You did?
that I did, and I
Ooh,
flipped because of 2014, because of the and it was because it, and it, after Gilad, Ayal, and Naphtali were killed, and I wrote that open letter in the Times of Israel that put me on the map. That was the moment where I said, actually, no, this is a problem. Like that was where the switch ended up coming about.
interesting. I'd say that, it's crazy. You still have 60% plus Jews in New York that are going to vote for Zoran Mamdani. Speaking of Zoran. So
I
it's
sincerely hope not, but
our criticism, uh, it's one of the great questions of our time. Why Jews will vote Democrat even after seeing everything that's going on.
mhm, it'll
Lost
never
you
make
there.
sense to me.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it'll never make sense to me.
You back?
Yep, I'm back.
Yeah. No, it's wild. And I think that's one of the things that really bothered Charlie. He couldn't understand why he was actually fighting on behalf of Jewish students in a more profound way than most of the Jewish groups. So that's the heart of it. And seeing our mutual friend gunned down on TV is really just crazy. What was going through your head when you first heard that he was shot?
Um, Disbelief. It was not. It was not the what no one was expecting it. Like, let's be honest. I don't think it shocked everyone, and I think that's the way you have to feel it. Once I was going through Twitter, I was looking through Twitter, and I saw something about it, and then yeah, I saw the video, and I kept like trying to figure out, like, looking at different angles of it, because, like, based on my background, like, when you're literally seeing evidence of a crime right in front of you, the only thing that you have to ask yourself is what happened, what's going on, what are the next steps with all of that. Like, and I was texting Ben trying to get information out of him as well, and it was brutal. Just like waiting for the anticipation where we all knew that. And I was talking to you throughout it
Yeah,
all as well.
I knew it right away. The second I opened Twitter and I saw that and I saw the second video, I was like, there's no way. I just didn't, it was, I just, for me, the idea that you need perhaps a counter sniper team to have a speaker come to campus is just beyond comprehension. And I still haven't really done it. I'm a little bit numb actually. And I hate the people that try to overstate a connection with someone or anything like that. I had a very, very close relationship with Charlie from 2014 to 2016. We did not break up. We simply were the product of life. He
Yeah.
went to Trump camp, was going through the whole thing. I met my wife, got married, had family. Thank God. Great. Stay in touch on text every so often, but I'm not trying to portray that it was him calling the president and then calling me. It certainly was not like that.
No.
But it's just crazy to say, like, okay, you were with this person, sharing meals, sharing life, working on something, and all of a sudden he's assassinated and the whole world sees it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I just want to turn slightly here. You're a lawyer. You went to law
hmm
school. What's your take on this whole situation with Jimmy Kimmel being removed from the air by ABC?
You know, it's I'll take Ben's approach, our former boss Ben, and his approach, that I think the FCC kind of making a statement and giving the impression that the government was involved in that is not a good thing at all. And it just adds a narrative that is unnecessary, and based on what I believe is going on, it's false, and it seems to be false. But this idea that the local broadcasters and the local networks are revolting, or decided to revolt against the parent company to tell Jimmy to get off the air because he like this I'm sure you listened to the statement multiple times that the quote unquote joke that he ended up making. There was nothing comical about that. And to be fair, in my opinion, Jimmy Kimmel has not been funny for a very long time. He's been more in the mold of Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert than anyone that came before him, or anyone came before him. And if you're going to go out and try to play this, oh, I'm a comedian, but I'm also going to report on talk about something in the news, and then you're going to make some sort of insinuation that the people that were supporting Charlie this entire time, the people within his movement, the movement that he helped create in his own right, was responsible for the death. It's almost like you're insinuating the false belief that because Charlie was quote unquote hateful, that it resulted in someone wanting to take him out. It's despicable. And there comes a point where people just have to say enough is enough, and pulling him off the air on because ever as a business decision, no different than what Stephen Colbert is getting canned for the same reason, or Roseanne Barr got canned for the same reason. Why Tucker Carlson got canned by Fox News, all for the same reason. And you're seeing the Democrats go out there and say one thing when it comes to their side, and then says the complete and categorical opposite or the other. And they're now talking about how they're the scions for free speech and all that stuff. Meanwhile, they're going out there either minimizing or even to the worst case scenarios justifying our mutual friend's murder. Get out of here.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that there is a free market decision on it. I think that it would make sense that people would be outraged by it. I do share the concern about having government trying to take a win on it, but that's kind of baked into the cake when it comes to Trump. So I'm not really so surprised about it, but
Me neither.
it is a free market decision. And if it was hypothetically the other way around, and you, in some strange alternative universe, had conservative comics outside of Greg Gutfeld on late night TV on ABC or NBC, and they made such a remark about a left-wing person who had been assassinated on a college campus by a right-wing assassin, I think it would be totally fair for there to be consequence and for people to say, hey, I don't want to listen to it.
Right.
And
I think
that's a totally fair thing. And it also, I really am quite shocked that people would even try to equate Charlie's situation with Jimmy Kimmel being suspended by his private employer. That to me also is mind-boggling.
I mean, Dave Rubin had a great little skit on Twitter today. It was like saying, "Hey," I was like, "Hey, Jim, Dave Rubin here," and then goes on to say, "It's like I want to give you some tips when you decide to go digital." It's like, and the joke there is, yes, he may have been Jimmy Kimmel might have been may no longer have his studio, may not have the platform that he had, but there's one thing that he will absolutely have, should he choose to do so, which is his right or not, that Charlie can't. Jimmy Kimmel can go on to a podcast. He can be a guest at somebody else's show. He can do something. He
He
can.
can go
There's
on
another
Substack. I'm
avenue.
sure he'll go
He
to
can go.
Substack.
You go to Substack or anything else, and he can just yell into the wind about all things wrong about life, the universe, and everything. And Charlie got shot in the throat, and he's dead and left behind his wife and kids. I'm sorry, but if there are people who are much more angry about the Jimmy Kimmel situation, which, let's be fair, not like optics of it are not necessarily great, and those who aren't really aware of some of the legal distinctions and about licensings and licensors and all that stuff, I get it. Law is complicated, especially First Amendment law. The reality is, if you're mad about that, and you're uniquely mad about that, but you're gonna go and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I guess it sucks that that someone like Charlie Kirk got shot, but and then what about ism? Or someone it sucks that Charlie Kirk that like died and it shouldn't happen, but he was also a hateful bigot, or in the worst case scenario for some of these absolute scumbags and like cheering it on. Sorry, there's no moral equivalency. There's no factual equivalency. It's just outrageous.
And I mean, if you remember the whole thing with Chick-fil-A, I'm just looking about it now. You remember there was a lot of pressure coming back at Chick-fil-A under they were claiming it was non-discrimination policies and the executive orders, but at the heart of it, it was a private company trying to observe their religious beliefs. And again, my wider point here is simply that it's disingenuous for people to say that government historically has never been involved in trying to push around private business to some extent. I'm not saying you want it to be that way, but to say this is the first time in history that this is happening and there's a fascistic regime that's trying to crack down on free speech, get out of here. And it's particularly frustrating, again, after, as you just said, after we just watched Charlie get murdered trying to speak on a college campus. So it's infuriating. And I think that's part of the reason, it's certainly part of the reason why I'm trying to come back in full force here. And I think you are as well, because sitting on the sidelines is really hard when you see this kind of stuff happening.
Right. I think it's extraordinarily difficult because you know that the more voices that are like in the ether and trying to share ideas and share ideas is more important to it was more important to Charlie than anything else. I think it there were two I was reading or watching something along the lines about Charlie really wanted to accomplish two things. He wanted to ensure that that free debate was still like it should be the norm because as he famously said, the moment that we stop talking is the moment that we start killing each other, and he absolutely and prophetically did not want that to happen. But to that point as well, he wanted to de-radicalize people, and and it seemed like he wanted to de-radicalize these young men, a lot of young men who are trying to who may be on the verge of nihilism and trying to help them find purpose and realize that, and also and probably women as well, same thing. Just give a vision for a world in this country where, regardless of what you believe in, regardless of how you identify, where you come from, and whatnot, that we have a that we have a fair shake, and that we have a country that we can be proud of. Now, of course, he was never going, and that's another thing. He never ran away from the dark history of this nation, and it would be folly if any one of us would ever try to push that away or minimize it or whatnot. That's not the point. The point is, why focus so much on the past and all the mistakes that we made when we know that we can be better? And in my view, that's the way I view Charlie, is that for however one could argue that his methods were perfect or not, he clearly wasn't. He would even say it so himself that he wasn't all that every time that he took the microphone that he was perfect. And he would not first say anything along those lines. But the point is that he was genuine. He had always been genuine. He loved this country. He loved what these idea what this country was founded upon. And that's the legacy that, in my view, you and I are recognizing that we were lucky because we got to see where Charlie was in the beginning of all of this, and however whatever distance ended up passing because of life did not change the fact that we were all brothers in this fight. Like, we care about this country. We care about making sure that my future children, God willing, and your children have an America that they can be proud of.
Absolutely. I'm going to leave it there. It's getting late here, but you're absolutely right. And I'll say that Charlie understood that the foundations of America were amazing and that certain actors were using those amazing levers of power to do things that perhaps were not so good for the country, and he wanted to use those same institutions to try to right those wrongs. And he
Hmm.
was a great guy. So, Elliot, it's great to have you on. I appreciate it, and promise me you'll come back as more things evolve.
Of course, brother, and I will be remiss to say, Charlie, may your memory be a blessing.